How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi, host of Tier Talk, and today I want to discuss what happens after a major incident. I want to lean towards when we have policy that's violated, especially when we're dealing with a riot or the death of an officer, and I want to discuss the multiple perspectives that you may get from management as well as frontline. And today, my guest is retired Major and criminal justice professor Soto. So today, me and him are going to have a discussion about what happens when there's a violation of policy in regards to a major incident, and is there a way that we can find middle ground, a way that we can alleviate the conflict that automatically occurs after a major incident. Okay, so let's just talk about what happens after an incident occurs. Now, when I talk about an incident, I'm talking about more like, let's say, a riot or the death of an officer. So before we talk about management's perspective when it comes to looking at policy and who should be held responsible, let's just take a riot, for example. What would happen immediately by management after a riot occurs inside a correctional facility?
Well, once the management has been aware that a riot has occurred, your first and foremost is security of the institution, right? So you're going into your lockdown procedures, making sure that your supervisory staff that's on hand, the custody staff, is following the emergency procedures that are written. That's what I love about corrections. Corrections, most of the time when something happens, an incident like that, we have set guidelines that we follow, right? Post orders, policy and procedure, emergency procedures, whatever it is that we are. So once the institution's on lockdown and basically the incident has been contained, the information flowing upwards towards management, that's where it gets disseminated and basically dissected to see what's the next step. What do we do as far as initial investigatory procedures, where we need to find out, was it a violation of policy, was it a lapse in security measures, was it someone's actual wrongdoing and not following what policy states and dictates. That's where it starts getting dissected.
When you mentioned violation of policy, when management goes back to look at if policy was violated, are they looking at it from like multiple perspectives? Like maybe was there something about policy that maybe wasn't up to date, or was this the individual fault of a staff member who may have violated policy without even knowing that they violated policy?
That's true. And speaking in general terms, when we have policies that are reviewed on a yearly basis on most correctional settings, that when an incident occurs, that's the first place you go to, because that's basically your zero, your day one. Let's see what happens. The incident occurred for a purpose. If it was a riot, it had a purpose. Why did it happen? And was it able to be contained right away, or wasn't it? So if there's a violation in policy, whether gates were left open that allowed the inmates to get through to a certain unauthorized area, who's responsible for that gate being open? Was it a gate malfunction? Was it just the policy wasn't up to date? A lot of jails and prisons are going through reconstructions and trying to get into those rehabilitative states, right? Our facilities sometimes were not built for that. So in changing, are we thinking about the policy? Does it match what we're trying to accomplish? And inmates are watching the entire time. They're always thinking, did that enable them the opportunity to cause harm, to cause a riot to start, or any other emergency?
And it was funny that you mentioned that, because just recently we actually had a conversation about having these rehabilitation programs in facilities that may not have been meant to have that type of programming, and it's great because I believe that Frontline has adjusted, and you're right, they're making it work. But having said that, when they do make adjustments, are we updating policy, and are we letting staff know that these are the changes that are needed? Like, I know if a situation was to occur, let's say, in my mind, like let's say something happens inside our correctional facility and a situation was to occur. Once we start moving forward in the investigative process, I'm going to want to know right off the bat policy. Now, when I go to look at policy, it's not necessarily looking to blame someone. Right. I'm also may see, was policy suffice? Maybe I made a bad call. I mean, there's budget cuts right now. Maybe I made a bad call that maybe unintentionally violated policy. Right. But we do need to know where that policy was violated, if it was.
Right.
Correct?
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, good.
And we have to protect ourselves as well. Now, custody or the line personnel, they're more concerned with, God forbid, there was a death, whether it be the inmate or whether it be an officer, right? Their viewpoint as far as line staff and our daily and obvious, the officers are the ones that deal with most of the altercations that happen in an institution. They're more in tune with, let's get the control of this facility. Let's get, safety is foremost. Let's get these inmates that were involved shipped out of here. Let's not open up this institution. While management has the responsibility not only to investigate whether there was a policy that needed to be changed or policy that was broken or not followed, but also to get back to normal operations as soon as we can, right? Obviously with safety and security in mind, but also we have to protect ourselves, make sure that we are not held responsible for something that someone may have done that's in violation of policy. So the investigatory process, that's what really would let us know and let us know what it is that needs to be changed, if anything needs to be changed. So
right, and we talked about that. Even let's just say that there was a violation of policy, because that's kind of where the conversation I want to kind of bring to light. And let's say there is a violation of policy, and management it may not necessarily. And I want to put this out there. This has to go out to management. We're not necessarily out to go after the front line until we understand why that policy had to be violated. And what I mean by that is sometimes, again, when we're trying to deal with the evolution of corrections and making these changes so rapidly, we may not be aware right off the bat that, hey, wait a second, we missed out on this. And we may have to be sort of reactive. And that's sad, but unfortunately it happens. It's part of the evolution of corrections. So, and again, with that evolution, if there was a mistake that made or a violation that occurred, I would still think that frontline staff would still have to at least give us the justification. And if that justification starts from where policy wasn't suffice, we have to listen to that. Absolutely. Because that's part of that evolution.
We do, and just like as an example, if policy dictates that, let's say on a night shift, and an officer's usually by themselves on a unit, and they're doing their tours, and they see an inmate that's hanging or trying to commit suicide, right? Policy may dictate that that officer is not allowed to open that cell door until there's backup in the area or a supervisor is contacted. But the officer in his mind also has that, sworn law enforcement officer duty to act, right? Where if I don't act right now, this inmate may be in his last final breath. So he opens the door and does the radio call, to try to get the backup there as fast as possible. So now he saves a life or doesn't save a life, and did that policy suffice? And who's to say? If the officer has the opportunity or the ability to open that cell door, then maybe we as management failed, right? Because we gave him the opportunity to do that.
I agree with you 100%. That's a great point, Lou. As management, I would like to think that we were the kind of people that are going to make sure that we didn't put that person in a predicament to violate policy. So I want to go back to that example. It's a great example. Right. You got a guy hanging. The natural intent for us is to save that individual's life. Right. Now, while the person's hanging, we have to keep a policy says can't open up until backup comes. Correct. But now this person is motivated because they have the key, they can do it. So technically, if that person can only open the door when backup's there, why are we giving him this key? He doesn't need the key. Right. And that's a great example because that shows that maybe there's sometimes where we unintentionally may wind up having someone violate the policy. But I always told people, if there's a chance that they have to go left or right, you have to go left or right from what's written. Right. And you have to know, past practice is killing corrections on a national level. Past practice, and what I mean by past practice is people that may believe that it's policy, and then when you go to show them what policy is, they're so far removed because complacency had breeded complacency. So right. I'm sure you've dealt with that in your time, where past practice, where people actually defended it like it was the norm.
Right. This is what normally happens. We always leave that door open. We always leave that gate open just to expedite the movement, or try to stay within time frames when programs are being run. So yes, and it's like, wait, well, that's the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. Why is there a problem now? Well, obviously an issue occurred. A riot happened, or an inmate had access to an unauthorized area. And when you look at the black and white, the written policy, the way things are supposed to run, we find that we failed somewhere, right? As far as management is concerned, yes, there's going to be an investigation. Yes, we're going to go right back to the roots. What does it say that this officer has to do, essentially, in his position, in his job? Did he or her perform that job in the way it was supposed to be done? Now, let's say they did. Let's say that policy, the way it dictated, there's one officer in one vicinity or one general area who's got control of multiple doors, multiple gates, and this officer was overran by the inmates or whatever the case may be, and the inmates gain access to keys. Well, then, it wasn't the officer's fault. No, right. It might be a policy failure where we didn't see that coming. And we learn. That's what I love about corrections, because we learn for every incident that occurs.
Right, and we're in the midst of a big evolution with corrections now. I think people are going to start seeing, we talked about it the other day at the ACA meeting, the balance between rehabilitation and safety and security, knowing that safety and security trumps. It just is. You're not going to have a facility that can even include rehabilitation unless you have the canvas for it, which would be the safety and security aspect. Now, one of the funny things here is that after a major incident, this is where we should be united, protecting each other. But unfortunately, there is going to be a divide because of the perspective. Now, again, frontline, and got to give them credit, are looking to protect that individual, who, again, may have violated policy, but the intent was good. Granted, the intent was good. Now, management is being told something else, unfortunately, is where's the liability? Is the liability in the institution, upper echelon, the executive staff, or can the liability be brought to the individual? And that's a conflict. Yeah. So, you obviously, in your career, you've seen that happen, right? Yeah. How can you alleviate that?
And here's the thing. We can't do away with the conflict, right? Because at the end of the day, management, upper echelon, they have that basic venue that they have to deal with, where if an incident occurs, you're the management, you're supposed to run this institution to the best of your ability within the norms and within the guidelines that you're given. The conflict comes from the line staff that have a different viewpoint because they're looking at their small world. They're looking at their portion of that big wheel. They're looking at, listen, an incident occurred, an officer got hurt. Inmate should be locked down for the remainder of this year, right? Whether it be 6 months or a year. That's their frame of mind or way of thinking, that we're not going to let these guys out and we're going to punish the rest of them until they are well behaved and in line. While management is going on the aspect of, wait a minute, this facility can't run in that fashion. We can't go back to what we were doing. We need to examine what happened, what occurred, right? What led to that, if we can find out what led to it, and was policy at fault? And where does the liability fall? But we have to take a further view from a rear aspect and see the whole picture, right? Yes, security and control, but also we need to take that step back and say, okay, as a managerial aspect of it, how do we go back to the normal running of this institution and make the fixes that need to be made, if there's some?
Right, and as I said, it's good that we have a conversation like this, because I think somewhere along the line, the reason why I'm promoting a conversation like this is because that perspective gets lost. The perspective of what higher up is accountable for, and then also also the front line and their vision of protecting the individuals. Now I also think that the big part of any major incident is also what we call like a CISM team, or a peer-to-peer support team. And the reason why is because just having that dialogue with staff that has been through something major can literally maybe help de-escalate the tension. And what I mean by that is, if you, like the riot in North Carolina where we lost four heroes, you know that there's going to be a lot of animosity towards the inmates in general, and vice versa, inmates towards staff possibly, because their staff has to maintain control. There's an investigation going on. Right. These inmates are locked down, and some are going to say, well, it wasn't us, we're not responsible. It doesn't matter. The facility's locked down. They need to understand that. There is going to be that tension that's going to occur where after this incident happens, now you have staff who obviously, and it makes sense, is going to be frustrated. Anybody that is an inmate. It's just that generalized animosity towards that group. So I think management, in order to make an effort to protect both parties, they need to have someone on ground level, and I'm not talking about passively waiting for people to come to them. I'm talking about someone on ground level that gets put back into that facility, that could walk around, talk to staff, and see if there's anything under, like an undertone going on, so they can try to address it, just in case when you go to pop those cells, because unfortunately it's going to happen eventually, right, you don't get a clash.
Right.
So how important do you think it is for that? I want to actually call it a debrief.
Right. Right. Well, just like any situation, whether it be confronting something, the de-escalation has to happen, right? And how do we de-escalate anything from occurring, even if it happens? A riot happens, we contained it. Now, like you said, we're gonna have to open up these cell doors eventually. Management needs to recognize that staff, they're humans as well, and they may need that CISM team, whatever, critical incident stress management team, to come in and talk to our staff and see if there's any underlying tones, like you said, that may affect them doing or performing their jobs or their duties, as well as the inmates. We have the social services department that comes in and talks to inmates. We have psychiatrists that come talk to inmates. And after a riot or after a big incident, yes, those are always there and afforded to the inmate staff. We need to afford that to our line staff as well. But the procedures are there in place most of the time, where we're not going to open the jail up or the prison up right to where we left off. It's going to be a progressive and slow moving. It may take weeks to get back to normal. It may take a month to get back to normal, but we have to have our finger on that pulse and make sure and see how our institution is progressing after an incident.
Right, and as I said, part of it is definitely, what we mentioned, is that team, that peer-to-peer support, because a lot of states don't have that.
Okay.
And again, I am pushing that. I'm pushing the fact that we need a way for those officers to debrief. And also, and you said, inmates are going to have those services.
Right.
Officers may not. Frontline staff, not just officers, civilian staff are going to know.
And the supervisors,
whoever needs to kind of get something off their chest. Because the weird thing about corrections is that they have to go back into that environment. You know, now I mentioned this in one of the shows I did. Imagine, like, let's say I went to a movie theater and someone I loved got killed at that movie theater. I could avoid going to that movie theater.
Right.
But when you're in corrections, and in North Carolina, when they lost 4 staff members, these guys that work with them, that know them, that love them like a brother and sister, because that's what we build in corrections. We build a giant partnership, because you got to love me because you're going to risk your life for me one day. You got to, you know, it's a sacrifice that make it. It's a family, if you will. Mm-hmm. Now you're going to have to go back into that environment where you're going to be reminded of those stressors, you know, and you need some way to kind of alleviate, you know, just to get something out. And that's why I really think it's very important for these facilities now to start really putting some money or putting some investment into teams that can help out. And if you don't want to do it for them, do it for liability's sake. You open up doors and you have that clash. You know, I would ask, if I was a lawyer, hey, what did you do to make sure the environment was okay? Yeah, you got the investigations good, you know who the parties are,
right.
But what did you do to de-escalate the tension?
Right. And here it is, the whole thing that managers have to realize that all of that, when it boils down to cost, a little bit, it has a cost attached to it, right? So not only do we need to make sure that there's the funds that can basically help with gaining these officers that particular service that they need, but sometimes we need to reach out, right? There's a lot of volunteer programs that are out there that can come out and speak and debrief, and they know exactly what an officer is going through. I mean, I found it hard as an upper management coming home and speaking to my wife about things that may happen at work. I couldn't do that with my wife. She's a civilian just like anybody else. And that's another aspect we haven't talked about. We're not only officers in that prison, there's civilian staff that's in that prison, that these are inmates that they kind of see as, you know, I'm helping them. They're trying to rehabilitate themselves, and they form bonds sometimes. And something to happen in a prison setting is not just the officers, it's also the civilian staff that works there, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, the psychiatrists, social services. All of those people need to debrief and be informed as to, hey, here's what happened, and here's what we're doing to make our institution better, safer, and debrief, like you said.
Right, and that's actually, as I said, part of the evolution. And, and you're right, just my custody background, I was always forward my mindset to the officers, but you're 100% correct, and thank you for that. It's everybody collectively, you know, and hopefully, as my years of doing this, people realize that I do mean everyone, because everyone's part of the team. You know, it's our collective effort to move forward, and that kind of leads me towards the next question in regards to the changes that are implemented and how important it is to get frontline staff. And when I say frontline staff, I do mean, you know, civilian and custody. Frontline staff involved in those changes, because I'm thinking of is if there ever was, let's say, a violation of policy, right? Hypothetically, and management and frontline are working on making the policies better, management may be in a better position to defend the intent of the individual, because again, they're still a step removed. But then you have the people that are analyzing it that are 4 steps removed. Right. So I really do believe that there could be a good bond created between management and frontline if they communicated, discussed what changes are needed, and if there was ever a violation of policy, management could step up and hopefully defend the choice a lot better, because they're aware of, you know, why that policy was violated and why it wasn't suffice.
And we also, as management, cannot remove ourselves from an incident taking place and not taking a little bit of the blame in case that policy did falter, if that policy wasn't to its full capacity helpful, right? Because as we can't write everything that may happen in a prison. I love corrections because you can go back in history, and if we do something, an incident occurs and we do something went well, we write it down, right? Again, if we have an incident and something didn't go well, we still write it down because we learn from every experience. But as we go year to year to year and we do these reviews of these policies that need to be done, sometimes we find ourselves that we're sitting in an office reviewing these policies and say, okay, nothing's changed, everything's going well, and we forget that we need to involve everybody in that chain. Everybody from the supervisor who works in that particular unit to the officer that works that every single day, they're the ones that can tell you, is it working, is it not working? Does something need to be tweaked in order to prevent some major incident from occurring? You know, sometimes as we change and we're quick to change and try to make things better, we forget to take a step back and talk to the people that are actually doing the job.
Well, because they're affected by the immediate changes that people may be making, again, from the safety of their office.
Correct.
That's why, as I said, I always think that if you initiate a change, it's good to have like a collective force, if you will, representing different departments that would be affected by that change, and just seeing, hey, I'm planning on doing this. What are your thoughts? You know, and then we kind of build the best. But at least, even if it doesn't go the way that frontline would want, because maybe there is just a higher push, at least they have an understanding of why it's needed, and just them not being in the dark can alleviate a lot. I mean, right now, you know, corrections, obviously, you know, is in the dark in a lot of the changes, and most of them would be willing to step up and follow through with those changes, but they feel that they're not being included, and that's what gets them more frustrated, and that also builds resistance.
Right. You have to include them. I mean, inclusion is key. If you want someone to follow policies, procedures, post orders, whatever it is that you're trying to impose to make it a better institution, if you include them in the decision-making process, they're more likely to follow those policies to a T. Right. And if something were to get in the way of policy being perfect, they will let you know. Right away, they'll be able to say, listen, I know we talked about this, I know that this is what we thought would be best for the unit or best for the institution, but it's kind of hitting an obstacle. Let's work through it.
Right, and the reason why I wanted to bring up from a violation of policy perspective is because that's where we'll have the divide.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, I mean, obviously, if everything went smoothly, you know, and the incident occurred and there was no violation, then, of course, obviously, there's no conflict here. I chose the violation of policy because it's going to put a divide right off the get-go. Like, this is what happened, policy was violated, and what I'm trying to do is find a way where you can ease that divide. And I think the key is just understanding why the policy was violated. So give that person a chance to explain themselves, especially if they can explain themselves from the policy not working. You know, so you know they have an understanding of the policy. And then also, you know, maybe policy, like you mentioned before, it wasn't suffice. And if that's the case, then we failed as management. So either way, before, it's just kind of get out there before we start pointing the finger and just start, you know, trying to kind of just, that divide just gets bigger and bigger. Take a step back, you know, breathe a little bit, and let's really see what went wrong by literally reading the policy, but then going back before making judgment, talking to the front line and say, hey, listen, what happened? Because I don't think that's being asked at all. I think people are just jumping the gun because of the pressure, and they're not going back to the front line and just literally asking those two words, like, what happened?
Yeah, well, you know, as management, again, as soon as an incident occurs in your institution, you're going to be held liable, you're going to be held responsible, you're going to be asked the tough questions. What happened? What happened? What did you do about it? And what was done in order to improve whatever setting was there to begin with? And we kind of forget. We kind of forget that our staff need to justify themselves if in fact they violated some sort of policy. Just violating policy doesn't mean they're in trouble. Doesn't mean that they did something wrong. Justify. Tell me why you had to make the choice you made. Because it may very well be that you made the right choice at that particular time.
Right, and it's good for management to understand the specifics of that environment, understand the specifics of why that the policy was violated, because you know, most people that don't have that experience on the ground level, that policy becomes their way of life. They think everything's going to be black and white. You know, you make a decision, it's either A or B, and then people with experience are going to tell you that's not true. You know, there's a lot of alphabets, you know, a lot of letters in that alphabet, and you're going to make decisions, but most of the time you're fighting to bring things back into policy. So if you're looking just to judge us between point A and point B of policy, that's the problem. But if you're looking to understand that policy is an idea that we want to kind of work with, yes, but there's discretion in those policies, and you have to allow us to make certain discretion in an effort to bring things back to order. But if you don't allow that, then unfortunately you're going to have staff that's going to hesitate because they feel like they're being micromanaged and they're being judged for any act of discretion, which may be needed, but unfortunately you're just going by policy, and as you said, policy doesn't include everything.
No, it cannot in any way, shape, or form cover every aspect of every situation.
So you have anything in closing you want to say to my audience?
Well, what I say as far as incidents that occur that may be major in nature in your institutions, use them as a guiding tool for the following one. You know, it's going to happen again, unfortunately. You know, it happens in corrections. Unfortunately, we had the 4 deaths out there, and you know, I would wish that would never happen again. But we know that the possibility of me putting on my uniform, my badge, and going into work at a correctional setting, I may not come back, right? I take that risk. But if I work as a team and it's a team effort in trying to secure or have a safety environment, I mean, it's one of the things that management need to deal with as far as keeping track of what our staff are doing. That's easy. But when some incident occurs, being there for that staff member, because we need to know from them what exactly happened, what judgments you made, what decisions you made, whether they're in fact great, maybe they weren't great, but do we need to hold them so hard and so accountable for that in the future they're not going to make those decisions again.
And that's the key, where right now when you're at a major incident, especially what happened in North Carolina, there's going to be that divide. Right. And an effort like what we're trying to do now is an effort to kind of see if there's middle ground there. Do we have to have that divide? Are we really against each other at that moment, or are we kind of looking at things from a different angle? And like you mentioned before, before the management goes right to the pen and paper, let's look first. I know you got pressure on you to come up with answers, but in the meantime, you also have to do what's right. And what's right is understanding what happened and then going back and saying, okay, maybe it wasn't frontline, maybe it was management, or maybe it was. But the point is, you're taking time out to get the justifications and making your decisions in a manner that literally shows that you actually have care for the front line and the decisions that they need to make. And maybe actually if there's changes that have to be made, you make the changes. And then also, by all means, once you make the changes, you don't hold those officers responsible for the actions that they utilized prior because those changes weren't implemented.
That's true.
And we have a habit of that a lot.
That's true.
All right, so as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Catch us every week on MMN, 10:30 a.m. You can get it through Vios if you're in the 5 boroughs, or you can stream it live from their website. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Stay safe.